Hi, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'll be taking it from 12 to 3. Got some awesome guests. Great trial. Mark Sievers. This is really an amazing case. So you know Jimmy Rogers, a co-defendant in the case, has been convicted of second-degree murder, and the other co-defendant, Curtis Wright, has pled guilty as a cooperating witness against Mark Sievers. He's accused of orchestrating the hammering of his wife to death. You can't get any worse than that. They're the three defendants. I got some great in-studio guests here in our New York City headquarters here at the Law and Crime Network, a Dan Abrams production. First, Katie Smith out of New York. Katie is had hundreds of cases out of the Southern and Eastern District and throughout the United States, multi-million dollars in awards in civil contexts, a super lawyer, rising star, and you went to New York law. I'll get to that in a second. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. And
Kirk Burkhalter is a professor at New York law, a retired detective, 20 years, grade A, first-class detective, a great asset to our agency here at the Law and Crime Network. We've often on together. He does a great job with regard to analyzing things from the law enforcement end. So guys, listen, there was a lot of great testimony today. This case is really interesting. One of the witnesses was Sandra Hoskins. She was actually employed by Teresa Sievers in the medical facility that she used to work at. Let's take a listen to her testimony.
Did she have patient visits scheduled for Monday, June 29th?
Yes, sir.
What time was her first visit scheduled for?
9 a.m.
And was it normal for Dr. Sievers to have visits scheduled at 9 a.m.?
Yes, sir.
And did she make those 9 a.m. visits or 9 a.m. Appointments?
Yes.
Did she make this 9 a.m. appointment on June 29th?
No, sir.
And was it normal for her to miss an appointment like that?
No, sir.
When she missed the appointment, what did you do?
I tried calling her.
And when you tried calling her, does she have like a cell phone or a house phone you were trying to call her on?
Cell phone.
Her cell phone? Did you get a hold of her on her cell phone?
No, sir.
When you were unable to make contact with Dr. Sievers, what did you do?
I called Mark Sievers.
And the same gentleman with the pink tie you identified earlier?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to get a hold of Mr. Sievers?
Via text.
And when you got a hold of him, did you tell him that Dr. Sievers hadn't arrived at work yet?
Correct.
And did he respond?
Yes.
And how did he respond?
Text.
And what was his response?
That he could not get a hold of Dr. Sievers either.
All right, so Katie, give me your general impression of the case in general and how this witness's testimony fits in your mind. Is it something that he didn't respond, Mark Sievers, the husband, in the way that you would have expected?
I think that's what they're going for. I mean, this case is tough because we already have the convictions of the other people who are involved, or one conviction and a guilty plea. So the cards are stacked against Sievers, but remember, in the previous conviction, it was not for conspiracy. So they do have an uphill battle in terms of showing Sievers' direct involvement. Yeah,
so Professor, I mean, the obvious defense here is that he didn't do it, that this was done by these two individuals, Curtis Wright and Jimmy Rogers. And for what motive, though? I mean, have we heard that yet? I haven't.
No, we really have not heard a motive, which is unfortunately sometimes not uncommon when we deal with couples who are in a committed relationship. Who knows, perhaps they weren't necessarily getting along. You know, it's not always so nefarious as the insurance money or anything like that.
Yeah, and to that point, Katie, I'm even indicating the motive for Curtis Wright to do this, or anybody else. I mean, have you getting an idea of where they're going to go with this? Because Curtis Wright is a pretty damning witness for Mark Sievers.
I think that motive doesn't make sense unless you have Sievers. He's the linchpin that draws all this together. There was absolutely no incentive for the other two individuals to have committed this murder but for Sievers, but for his involvement.
Right, now Sievers got Curtis Wright got a cooperation agreement. He testified in the Jimmy Rogers trial successfully because there was a conviction, but not of the highest charge of only second-degree murder. So, Professor, where's the attack here for the defense? Are they going to basically say there's a motive because he was a cooperating witness, Curtis Wright, and that's why he's testifying favorably for the state?
Well, I think that's always grounds for attack for a defense witness. Whenever, it's kind of obvious when the witness is someone who's cooperating, well, that's the motive, right? What did you receive in exchange for your testimony? if you receive something, therefore we can't really rely on you. So that's probably the first line of defense. The second would be the lack of motive, like we just discussed. If the prosecution can't produce a motive, well, why would this person do this act?
Yeah, and these two, Curtis Wright and the co-defendant in the case, not Mark Sievers, but these two guys, Jimmy Rogers and Curtis Wright, met in prison together. I mean, so this is an interesting cocktail of individuals. And the state's theory of the case is that Mark Sievers solicited Curtis Wright, who got Rogers involved in to commit this murder. And what is the reasoning in your mind that it became such a brutal and horrific way to kill somebody? Because as we've heard from the first trial, one of them kicked the dog bowl and it alerted the victim and they hammered her to death. I mean, it doesn't sound like a really well orchestrated plan.
No, not at all. Jimmy the Hammer Rogers, right? He was the one who wound up sort of taking over after the scene became awry. I believe in the initial trial, there was lots of testimony that they wanted this to look like a burglary, but then things fell apart and they really didn't have a specific plan going in. So I think with respect to the two people who actually committed the murder, it was ill-conceived and Jimmy wound up being more violent than necessary.
Well, there was a lot of live testimony today. They're on break right now, but Detective Nick Schumann, I believe his name is Schoeneman, testified. Let's take a listen to his testimony.
First, were you present with Detective Downs when he recovered the front and the back of that cell phone?
No, sir.
And were you supposed to be supervising the Lee County Sheriff's Office detectives as they were going about their duties, collecting evidence, things like that?
No, sir.
Okay. What was your role then?
To assist them.
Are you aware if the covers collected by Detective Downs fit that cell phone?
I do not know, sir.
Okay. Do you know how old that cell phone is?
I do not.
Do you know how long it was in continuous use?
No, sir.
Okay. And if you don't know, that's fine. Do you know if that particular cell phone had a SIM card in it?
Not that I know of, sir.
Okay. Is it fair to say that, given all of your training, experience, and education, that you tend to be very conscientious and detail-oriented when collecting evidence?
I do my best, sir.
Okay. When you would have collected the jumpsuit provided to you by Detective Downs, do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you would have collected that, would you have used latex gloves when collecting that?
No, sir.
No?
I have a latex allergy, so I would have used nitrile gloves.
Okay, I'm sorry. I did not
That's
know
okay.
that. But would you have used some type of protective gloves so that your biological material would not transfer onto the items of evidence?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you collected these samples, were you doing any type of analysis, or was it your job just merely to collect, package, and send?
Yes, sir.
So I kind of asked you a yes or no question. I'll try that again. Is it fair to say that in the course of this investigation, your job was to collect, package, and send?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Ross asked you about some blue gloves found with coveralls. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Were there any blue gloves found or collected with coveralls to your knowledge?
They were provided by Doe Run as exemplars.
Okay, so the blue gloves were sample gloves, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But there were no blue gloves then that were found?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
Okay, Detective Schoeneman there on examination. Professor, while we were listening to that, you made a commentary, as certainly with 20 years as a great investigator, grade 1 here in the NYPD. It may not be, as we would say, sexy testimony, but it's necessary testimony. Talk to me about what you were saying off break.
It's so necessary. So exactly. So this might seem like, oh, we're kind of going through the motions. However, there's something that, going back a little ways, the O.J. Simpson trial taught us. Up until that point, it was a given that law enforcement processes evidence, with all due process, and they do things properly, and there's never an issue. That darn near pretty much lost the case in the O.J. Simpson trial. And since that point, the public is aware that, hey, I wonder how the evidence got from the crime scene to the court. And it's important that the lead detective testify competently and is able to talk about the chain of custody and how things were processed and why, and that all the steps were taken.
You know, Katie, in the cases that I've tried, and so many homicide cases, it's always a balance that you have to strike. You got to get it out evidentially because it's important and show chain of custody, but you also want to bore the jurors and you want to get to the meaty testimony like Curtis Wright, for example. But it's that balance that you have to strike. OJ is a perfect example of a case gone completely awry for many different reasons. But what are your thoughts about how to present that evidence? We always try to find a way to do it that intrigues the jury in some way, and it's hard.
Or even burying the boring stuff amongst more interesting witnesses. It's really hard. I'm a huge fan of visual aids. I think to the extent possible, if you make it visual, it at least gives the jury something to fixate on visually while they're listening to sort of boring testimony.
Yeah, Professor, I agree with that 100%. We used to put them in the middle, thinking about the ideas of primacy and recency being most important, what the jurors remember the most. But visual aids, and I had a case one time where my trial partner wanted to do a visual aid that I thought was ridiculous. It was a model house. We already had 1,000 pictures. I'm like, what do you need it for? But when we were introducing the evidence that was collected and he rolled that house out, I finally consented and said, okay, you take your stupid house and put it up there. The jurors literally leaned to the edge of their seats and were looking at it. I was shocked. I think that they were just thankful that they had something to look at other than listen to boring testimony. Thoughts?
No, absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I once had this is years ago, obviously, had a prosecutor tell me, Kirk, you are my visual aid. And we talked about what type of suit to wear and to hang my shield on the outside of my jacket and to present myself as a detective. And we talked about how to be interesting during my testimony. So I can't agree more. You know, whenever you get on the stand, you use a lot of police jargon and, you know, very stoic. It's not so helpful. But, you know, you want to look professional. You want to present yourself. If there's a visual aid you can use, fantastic. But if not, that witness has to be that visual aid for the jury.
You know, and now I know why I compliment you on your clothes all the time, because you took that lesson all throughout your life. You are the visual aid. You are at the Law and Crime Network, a Dan Abrams production, gavel to gavel coverage on the most fascinating and interesting cases in the United States. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
All right, crew, let's get started. All right.
Don't ignore the law. You must call 811 at least 2 to 3 days before any digging project so you can avoid hitting our essential buried utilities. For digging projects big or small, make the call to 811.
How I define making? In the broadest possible terms, it is making something extant in the world that didn't exist. Everybody who's ever made anything is bringing something into fruition for a reason, and that act in and of itself makes us stewards of our culture. It's something that we're talking about. It's a response. Actually, it's telling a story. That's really what it is. And I include everything that could be made: painting, sculpture, welding, all of that. Yellow is positive. When a kid gets their hands on the world and learns that they can make their fantasy play, that they can make their reality, that's power. And as far as I'm concerned, everyone should feel that kind of power. There we go. If there's something that interests you to bring into the world, that's fantastic. Go figure out how to do it. Go tell your own story. There it is. And so I want to know why you make. Let's go.
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
We believe in patriotism. We believe in our nation's youth. We believe veterans earn their benefits through their service to our nation. We believe in a strong national security. We believe in our country. For 100 years, veterans have been impacting our nation through the American Legion, and we believe it makes a difference. If you believe, learn more at legion.org/webelieve.
Anyone can fall victim to moving fraud. Know your rights and responsibilities.
We had really signed off on a price, and that was about it.
Without a signed written estimate, movers may try to charge more.
They were charging us now $2,000 instead of the agreed upon $900.
And may hold your items hostage until you pay.
Not only had they roughly handled or mishandled, it seemed like they had purposely destroyed things.
Visit protectyourmove.gov to download a free moving fraud prevention guide. Search for registered movers and view their complaint histories. Move with confidence.
All right, welcome back. You know, having done homicide work for a long time, I've always thought about not just the case. I don't know why, but and even last night I was thinking about some of the homicide cases I had, but the carnage it does to the people that surround the victim in the case is so often underlooked. So we're going to listen to some testimony from a doctor that worked with the victim who found the body. And I asked the audience, when you're listening to this testimony, it's important for the trial, but think about what went on in the mind of this person and will for the rest of their lives. Let's take a look.
And the morning of June 29th, did you happen to receive any contact from Mark Sievers?
Yes, I did.
How did you receive that contact?
That morning, I was on my way into work, and I stopped at the post office to get the mail. My phone was in the car, and when I came out to the car, I noticed that there was a voicemail that was on. It was a voicemail from Mark, Mr. Sievers, asking me to go to the house and check on his wife.
Now you're inside the garage. Did you make any efforts to make contact with Dr. Sievers from in the garage?
Well, as I was walking into the house, so I would say as I'm stepping into the step leading into the laundry room, which leads into the house, I was calling her name.
And did you get an answer?
There was no answer, no.
So did you get a chance to get into the house and try to figure out where she was?
After I took a couple of steps into the house, it was obvious where she was.
And why was it obvious?
She was dead on the floor in the kitchen.
You were able to see her?
Yes, I was.
Did you get a chance to, and I know I know that you're a doctor, but can you tell me how you were able to figure out at that point that Dr. Sievers was dead?
Well, there was a lot of blood on the floor in the kitchen, a big puddle around her body, and she had this massive head wound in the back of her head, and she was cold and lifeless.
And so you touched her body?
Yes, I did.
What was the purpose of touching her body?
To check for any signs of life.
Professor, I've always loved these people who found the body witnesses. I mean, but like I said, you know they've gone through a horrific thing. And like Katie just said when we were watching that clip, this guy's had to do this a second time now, describing this kind of crime scene. And even though he's a doctor and probably has dealt with, deals with death more often than the average person, when it strikes your personal life, what's been your experience as a detective as to how victims respond to these kind of things?
Well, victims respond, victims and the friends and families
yeah.
of victims and witnesses respond all types of different ways. However, for the most part, for someone who is not engaged, even if they are engaged in this, when it's someone they know, it's a life-changing event to see someone, you can see a million dead bodies, but when it's someone you know, someone you're familiar with, someone who you've spoken with, it's a life-changing event, and it's not something that goes away whatsoever. What's interesting here is, number one, like you said, he's a doctor and he's still affected. And number two, don't think for 1 minute the jury won't consider, well, this so-and-so, whatever they're going to call him, actually put this man through this knowing that she was dead in that house, if they believe that.
Professor, you just stole the question I had for Katie right out of your mouth, and I agree. This is like a really especially different kind of witness because the defendant placed him at that scene, and he didn't have to do that, but in order to try to cover his tracks, the state is alleging, he put this poor man in that position. That the jury's not going to like.
No, and it's also odd too because I don't think I would choose to put a doctor in that scene because the doctor is able as a witness to perceive things I think that would be more acute and more detailed than a layperson discovering a body. But I think certainly the jury is not going to take kindly to him putting him there.
You know, Professor, one of the smartest defendants in a homicide case I ever had, I thought did a very interesting thing. After the murder, the next day, he went and reintroduced himself back into the crime scene as the person who found the body. And when the police got there, was hugging the victim, saying, "Oh my God, whatever happened to you? What happened? Oh my God, somebody help!" And contaminated the whole scene with his DNA. Have you ever seen anything like that?
No, I have not, and that's pretty interesting. You know, for the most part, most people who, well, I can't say most of the people who I've seen in cases where folks commit homicides are not that savvy. They're actually very poor at staging crime scenes, but that's an interesting one.
Yeah, it takes a special guy to do that, and I think that the jury reaction viscerally to that when finally the story broke and we knew that it was him, or at least that was our allegation, and in fact he did get convicted for it, really looked at him in a negative way. So the prosecutor's doing that, I think, right here, poisoning the juror's mind about this is a bad guy here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the defendants who actually committed this crime, who were physically there, were not super prudent about the way they did it. But I think that Sievers took some careful steps to have his role hidden. So it's going to be a lot more difficult, I think, to get a conviction against him.
Professor, though, going back to your detective experience, though, I think that there's something that really interests me about these guys. The more you introduce other people into your plot, the more likely it is that you're going to get caught. And that's happened over and over and over again. Harder when it's just a one-on-one as opposed to other people that are plotting. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. The more conspirators, the more witnesses, the more people, period, the more it is likely that you will get caught, especially if you are engaged in weaving some type of a lie. Back to your original point, you know, a crime scene, no matter what anyone has seen on television, on the movies, it doesn't do justice, unfortunately, to what it's like to be in the midst of a crime scene.
Right.
And I think you made an excellent point that this doctor is going to notice everything in that scene.
Yeah, and that is a very good point. And the prosecutor's job is to create a mosaic because, like you say, it's different when you can't smell blood and you're in the courtroom trying to explain those kind of things because that is very, very visceral, the slickness of blood itself. So you try to portray that as a prosecutor to give a jury a visual sense of this. But anyway, Mark Sievers is accused here of making this doctor get into that scene as we've been discussing. Let's listen to the voicemail call that he made on the doctor's phone.
Hey, Mark. This is Officer Mark. I'm just calling to check on you, see how you're doing. I was texting with Michelle, and she said you already made it back safely. And for Myers, I just wanted to... Anyway, you got the idea. I will talk to you later. Teresa comes back tonight, and then the girls and I will be back on Wednesday night. Just wanted to say hello and see how you're doing. Take care, Mark. Bye. Hey, Mark. This is Mark. I called yesterday just to check on you. Now I'm calling you today to see if you can check on Teresa. I know it's early, 9:30 in the morning, and you're probably at work, and that's okay. Teresa's not at work yet, and the office is calling and texting, and we can't get through to Teresa. So I just thought maybe if you were not at work, you could possibly swing by the house. And the garage code is 1313, enter, and then the door opens up. Anyway, if you get this message, great. Otherwise, I'll call my mom, have her come over and check on Teresa. Maybe she's just sound asleep. It's just not like her. You know, in all the years I've known her to be a half hour late for work and not answer her phone. All right. Actually, it's an answer the phone, which is kind of normal for me, but not anything for work. All right. I'm rambling. I'll talk to you. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so there was a voicemail message and the communication going back and forth between the defendant, Mark Sievers, who doesn't know where his wife is. Professor, you made a comment like, why don't you call the police? Yeah, that would be a logical thing to do. Why do you think that he wanted this doctor to go there? Does it make any sense to you based on your investigative experience?
Credibility. The doctor's a credible person by virtue of the fact that he's an MD. He is clearly a friend. So to have this person find the body, perhaps if this defendant is guilty, and perhaps it was in his mind that this is the best person to find the body because everyone will believe him. His initial impressions of the crime scene would be that this was some type of burglary or robbery gone awry.
Yeah, I guess, Katie, to be fair, I guess if my wife weren't answering the phone and I didn't know where she was, I would be inclined maybe to call the next door neighbor and say, hey, can you go do me a favor? I'm not able to get in touch with Michelle. Maybe he was thinking that if he called law enforcement, he'd be alerting that he knew there was an issue.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to Z right away. I think really he hadn't planned any of this. He was reacting to the fact that the job was calling him. So I think he was trying to figure out what he could do to make himself look responsive, but not all of a sudden imagining some catastrophe. So I think calling the boss and the friend was probably the next logical step for him.
Yeah, well, anyway, the jury gets to listen to Mark Sievers in his own voice as he's sitting there as a defendant, has a right to remain silent, but that tape's talking loud and clear as far as the prosecution is concerned, piecing it together, stitching it together with a lot of evidence. This case, as you guys know, involves the solicitation of his friend Curtis Wright, who is now a witness against him, and that he also got another individual, Jimmy Rogers, and that those two went and hammered his wife to death. Now, Curtis Wright is a cooperating witness in the case, and Jimmy Rogers was convicted last month. So this is the last part of the triad of this case. That is whether or not the husband will be convicted of having ordered this hit, or, as the defense suggests, whether the defense suggests was simply them two doing it and he had nothing to do with it whatsoever. We're going to take a quick break here at the Law and Crime Network. We'll be right back.
What would happen if I had to pick up the phone, call 911 for one of my family members or one of my neighbors? What would I do if no one was on the other end to respond? What if there was no 911? So you can be a part of the solution.
Anybody can be a firefighter, male, female, younger, older.
We have school teachers, we have leaders in business.
Is me, you, anyone that wants to be.
There is no typical firefighter.
Everybody can make something, because I think everyone has a spark of creativity, and the reason that I have to keep making is because I don't think my life would be as fulfilling without it. If you make things yourself, that means you're not cowering in fear. You're out there taking chances. That, I think, is my way of saying I love you to the world. All right, now I want to hear why you make.
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
Can I give you a hand?
Interstate moving is much more complicated than just moving within your city or town.
Anyone can fall victim to moving fraud.
Do not sign a contract without knowing who you're dealing with.
Do the research on the company that's physically doing your moving.
Do as much diligence as you can and document as well as you can.
Do Better Business Bureau searches. I would Google the company online.
And the best place to find information is through the U.S. Department of Transportation.
Learn how to protect your belongings. Visit protectyourmove.gov.
All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us Research Program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become 1 in a million.
Yes. Oh, hi. I suppose you're wondering what an A-list celebrity like me is doing in a place like this. You must know,
I'm saving the world. Oh, hi, Beth. Yep, saving the world again. Did you know that 40% of all the food produced in the United States is thrown away? That means everything that went into that food, the pesticides, the water, the land, was all for nothing. Just look at this perfectly good food thrown in the trash. The pizza with extra Cheerios, these goldfish and Band-Aid tacos. And just look at this perfect trash burger. This pasta dog looks delicious.
You don't have to dumpster dive like Ed Begley Jr. to save the planet. Fight food waste by shopping smart and using what you buy before it gets trashed.
That's way better. Ooh, arugula.
Do your part and find out other world-saving tips at betterthaned.org.
All right, guys, covering this case, you know what's going to be pivotal for the prosecution, as it was in the prosecution of Jimmy Rogers, is Curtis Wayne Wright. He is the person who was involved in this murder. He has pled guilty to second-degree murder. He got a sentence recommendation of 25 years. He has yet to be sentenced because the prosecution's waiting to make sure he cooperates and testifies fully, fairly, and truthfully. We're going to get into what that really means in a couple of minutes, but let's take a look at Curtis Wayne Wright testifying for the prosecution after having admitted that he was a participant in this horrendous murder.
And what was the agreement for the work?
$100 a month.
Was there ever like a contract or anything written?
Not a written contract, no.
Old school gentleman's agreement?
I did it because he asked me to.
And did Mr. Sievers pay you the $100 per month as you agreed?
Yes.
Did you get paid every month or in increments?
No, it was kind of sporadic, so it was whenever it was a good time for them to pay. If money was tight, I'd wait, and sometimes they paid me early, so.
When you say money was tight, was your money situation tight?
Yeah, once I became disabled, I mean, I had limited income. I meant their money.
So at some point prior to your wedding, did Mr. Sievers ask to speak with you?
You said prior to, right?
Prior to getting married.
Yes.
Did Mr. Sievers ask to speak with you?
Yes.
And how did he ask to speak with you?
The night before he came to Missouri, he sent me a text message telling me that he had something personal that he needed to talk to me about. He didn't say what it was, but
okay.
He said that he'd hoped that we'd have some time to be able to talk privately.
So you're getting married and Mr. Sievers wanted to talk to you about himself?
Yes.
And so you said earlier that he had arrived at some point, either the night before or 2 nights before the celebration at your home. Did he ever tell you why he wanted to speak with you?
Not until the night before the wedding, or the day before the wedding, when he came to the house with everybody else.
And was this by text message as well? Or in person?
Well, when he came to the house, we talked in person. So there wasn't anything else said about it until he came to the house.
All right, so and when he came to the house, and this is, again, the night before the wedding when you were having the festivities at your house?
Yes.
Mr. Sievers indicated that he wanted to talk to you about something?
Yes.
Did you actually get a chance to talk to him?
Yes.
And tell us how that conversation happened.
At some point during that afternoon, he asked me if we could go somewhere and talk privately. So we went to my bedroom, closed the door where that could happen.
Wow, there you go. He's fulfilling his part of the agreement so far. He's basically testifying for Curtis Wainwright for the prosecution for a 25-year sentence. Professor, you know, what strikes me is when you look at these witnesses, this does not seem like some maniac, you know, homicidal kind of guy. Seems like a regular kind of Joe you'd see on the street and never suspect would get involved in something like this. It never ceases to amaze me. You've had a 20-year career investigating cases. What are your thoughts about that? How's his appearance?
So this is very interesting. So I take for granted that the police and the prosecutors feel that his information was sound and that they could rely on it. So, however, his testimony, I'm not that crazy about it. So he's a little laid back. Perhaps it's the fact that A, he's been in prison, which is not a easy place to survive. And also this is the second go around as far as providing this testimony. But the two don't seem to match up a little bit. So he just seems, like you said, very reserved, very normal person. Doesn't seem to be too animated. But however, I'm assuming that the prosecution and, like I said, law enforcement absolutely believed him, or else they wouldn't have him on the stand and wouldn't have cut the deal.
Yeah, Katie, because I know like defense attorneys or people like you could come in, and I'm a prosecutor, and when I'm putting a cooperating witness on the stand, especially something so crucial as what he's giving, I need to know for a fact that this guy is going to be able to deal with this kind of testimony, because they say sometimes when you sleep with dogs, you catch fleas. Thoughts?
No, I agree. I have two thoughts. First, I believe that in this trial now they're trying to undermine the credibility of this witness by saying forensically, and there was lots of testimony last week about that, the crime scene did not match his narrative. So that's one thing we can use to debunk him. But otherwise, my impression of him generally, I think is pretty good. If we watch more of his testimony, he actually starts to cry. He gets a little bit choked up about the actual killing. So, you know, he knew these people. These were people he was friends with. It's really upsetting.
It's disturbing to think that you wouldn't imagine that somebody that you know and you socialize with could be involved in such a heinous thing. But to the point, I love this witness. I think that we need to see more and more and more. Let's take a look. Okay, I apologize. My bad. We're going to take a quick break. But when we get back on the other end of that break, we'll have more of Curtis Wright's testimony on behalf of the state. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is Legal News You Can Use. Today we're going to be talking about workplace discrimination, and joining me is Betsy Bambrick, who has filed a complaint against the town of East Hampton, New York, for age and gender discrimination as well as retaliation. Betsy, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
What exactly happened?
In 2014, a new public safety administrator was hired by the name of David Betts. He came into my office and he gave me his phone and wanted me to watch a video of discrimination towards women. Figured that he was letting me know how he felt about having a woman, you know, as the director of code enforcement. He would make comments about my appearance and especially about my hair frequently. I just figured, you know, this is the way he is with women, and I'm just gonna have to suck it up and deal with it. He took a liking to a young woman that was hired, and he was making the comparison that me being old and her being young and new, that he was going to replace the old with the new. Not only am I getting nowhere, the retaliation was instant. They actually cut my salary by $18,000 immediately after I made a complaint. Being squeezed out of my career is what it felt like at the time.
But if they could do it to you.
They could do it to anybody.
And that's why we're happy that you're here, that you're telling this story. Betsy, thank you so much for coming on and really explaining your story. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Also joining us are Betsy's attorneys. First up is Chris Albanese. He's a partner at White, Hilferty & Albanese, and also joining us is Denora Smith, who's an associate attorney at the firm as well. Now, this firm specializes in discrimination, harassment, and termination matters. We're great to have you both here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
How does somebody know that something is age discrimination?
Betsy's case is textbook. You have the supervisor or the boss saying things like out with the old and with the new, promoting a younger, less qualified individual over the older individual, whether or not the older employee is being excluded from meetings or being excluded from choice promotions. Those are indicators that age discrimination may be a reason for that.
Chris Albanese, Denora Smith from White Hilferty in Albanese, we really appreciate you coming on. For more legal news you can use, go to lawandcrime.com.
Okay, welcome back. So we are breaking down Curtis Wainwright's testimony now. It's going to be a pivotal witness for the prosecution. We listened to a little bit of it before the break. Let's take a listen to a little bit more because it's fascinating.
All right, so when you're in your bedroom, what did you and Mr. Sievers, well, let me ask you this. Did he tell you what it was he texted you about wanting to talk to you about?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He told me that he and Teresa were having problems. Marital problems. He told me that she was having an affair, and that they were having financial problems as well, considering bankruptcy.
Did you believe Mr. Sievers when he was telling you these things?
Yes.
Did you have any proof that she was having an affair or that they were having any financial problems or anything like that?
No.
You took his word for it?
Yes.
What else did he tell you?
Well, we talked a little bit about, just different options. It was a short conversation because we got interrupted. At one point he said a hypothetical situation where if kids were going to be taken away and put into some kind of danger, that if I knew somebody that would be willing to help him.
Help him how?
We didn't get into the specifics, but my take on it at the time was maybe to have this guy run off, beat up, something.
And on the way to TK's to pick up the meat, did y'all have another discussion?
Yes.
And what was that discussion about?
It was a continuation of the same conversation. So he brought it up again, told me, that she was leaving him, that he couldn't let her take the kids away from him, and again said that they were in danger, some kind of danger, without him there to be able to protect them.
Did he ask you to do anything?
Yeah, we talked about some more. It was the same options, just brought back up. And when we kind of exhausted that, he told me that really the only option that he had was for her to die. And he said that he needed to have her killed.
Okay, so on your wedding day, on your drive to pick up meat for your wedding, Mr. Sievers is telling you that he wants to have his wife killed.
Yes, he asked me to help him.
I mean, what kind of help was he asking for? Was he asking you to do it yourself, or what? Like, what kind of help could he be possibly asking his friend for?
Well, it was pretty direct. He asked me if I would kill her or take care of it.
Wow. Okay, Curtis Wainwright is on the witness stand. Those were direct examinations by the prosecution. He and his wife were having problems, financial problems. They were maybe having to go for bankruptcy. The kids, he said, he was afraid they were going to be taken away. He needed someone to help him. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but then the conversation continues that she was leaving him and may take the kids, and he wanted to protect the kids, and the only option for him was for her to be killed, and asked him to help him in that endeavor. Professor, you were making a comment, and of course, if the jury believes it, it's lights out in the case, but you were making a comment about how physically in the courtroom, which is very important, the defendant can't even look at Curtis Wright when he's testifying. Talk to us about that.
It's very interesting. So quite often, needless to say, I'm not in the mind of the defendant here, but it's quite interesting. You put two people in the room, and their interests are adverse to each other. And one person is describing how the other person and that person did something illegal together. If that person is telling the truth, it's very difficult for the defendant to stare at them and constantly look at them. If that person's not telling the truth, that person tends to look at them and has a reaction. And here, it's just very interesting. The defendant seems to never make eye contact with the witness at all.
Yeah, and you know, I found compelling is that this conversation is occurring during Curtis Wright's wedding.
I know.
Yes.
I mean, you know, can you imagine this? Hey, best to you. Hope everything goes good, but I need you to kill my wife. Not really, like a little bit of like a damper, no? I mean,
it's crazy. I mean, it was like the day before he started this conversation, actually during the wedding. It just shows, I think, the megalomania and the narcissism of Sievers. I mean, what a really inopportune time to solicit a murder.
yeah, I mean, that's the kind of fact that you almost can't make up in a scenario that is almost has to be believed.
Absolutely, and he testifies with great detail here, all the things that you mentioned and about the wedding and so forth. So I'm walking back a little bit because of the detail that he's testifying about and the details of the phone call, when they occur and all these particular things. I think it's a little difficult to just make up all that.
Yeah, and you know what? I bet that his wife, after the wedding, when she found out about this, wasn't really happy about the fact that he got himself involved in a conspiracy to commit murder, is now spending 25 years in prison. We'll see where that relationship goes. But here, only on the Law and Crime Network, can you get this gavel-to-gavel coverage with the awesome guest that I have. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Curtis Wayne Wright's testimony.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is legal news you can use. So we all hit a rough patch at one point or another. There's no shame in admitting that. Many times it concerns money, and maybe you're having trouble staying afloat. So our topic today is, when should you consider filing for bankruptcy? Bankruptcy is for those who can't fulfill their financial obligations and need a do-over. But bankruptcy is reserved for only those extreme situations, and a court is going to look at the following. You've tried but failed to work out a settlement with your creditors. You've turned to consumer credit counseling, but it hasn't resulted in a solution. A court ordered that your wages be seized or garnished to satisfy your debts. You have outstanding medical bills that you just can't pay. You either don't have assets or not enough to pay off your debts, or your savings account, if you have one, is not going to help either. Okay, so you want to declare bankruptcy, but which kind? There are two that apply to individuals. Chapter 7, where your assets that can be sold off by a court will be in order to pay off your debts. This includes clothing, jewelry, artwork, or property. Or Chapter 13. Now, this option's better for people who have a steady income, because here you just reorganize your debts and develop a plan to pay back over time. There are a lot of advantages to filing for bankruptcy. Namely, your creditors will stop coming after you, and in certain cases, you won't have to repay some of your debt at all. But remember, bankruptcy can seriously hurt your credit score, and it doesn't relieve you of having to pay specific debts like alimony, taxes, child support, or mortgage payments. So before you file, consult with an attorney first. For more legal news you can use, go to lawandcrime.com.
Hi there. You might wonder what a famous Hollywood celebrity like me is doing reading in the dark. Is this some new sort of Hollywood method acting? No, this is quite real.
Did you know that Americans use about 4 times as much energy per year as the global average? We waste energy left and right, despite the fact that the dirty fossil fuels we use to power our energy sources wreak havoc on the natural world and destroys valuable wildlife habitats.
By reading with my solar-powered night vision goggles, I'm saving energy and looking sleek.
You don't have to sit in the dark like Ed Begley Jr. to save the world. Fight climate change by speaking up for cleaner, smarter energy, including rooftop solar.
Oh, that's way better. Oh.
Do your part and find out other world-saving tips at betterthaned.org.
Both my legs were amputated due to an IED. It's when you start to try to get back into like an everyday life. I absolutely felt like I lost some of my purpose. There must be something more. When DAV came into my life, they gave me a new mission. I could still be a productive member of society, could still support a family.
The DAV gave him that sense of structure and purpose again to get his life back together.
Visit DAV.org to learn more about our mission.
Okay, State versus Mark Sievers. His wife was hammered to death. The question of this trial was it the two convicted co-defendants that did it, unbeknownst to him, or was he involved in a diabolical plot to use those co-defendants to hammer his wife to death? A cooperating witness, Curtis Wainwright, who accepted a plea of guilty to second-degree murder with a 25-year sentence recommendation to testify favorably for the prosecution, is on the witness stand. We've been listening to that. Let's listen to a little bit more of this fascinating direct examination.
So did you ever actually make a decision about whether or not he was going to get the help from you that he was asking for?
Yes, I did.
When did you make that decision?
It was a couple of weeks after the wedding before I actually made the commitment. I didn't get a phone, a second phone, right away. Some of the communication between us was asking if I had my phone yet. I delayed doing that because I wasn't sure what my involvement, or if any, would be.
Now, you told us, and I'm going to step back for a minute, because you told us earlier at the beginning of your testimony that you and Jimmy Rogers came down and did this. So how did Jimmy Rogers, if you and Mark Sievers are having these discussions about the death of his wife, how did Jimmy Rogers get involved?
Jimmy, and a little bit of background, Jimmy has let me know in the past that Jimmy has let me know in the past that his past criminal activity, that he's been involved in things like this. So, so the only person that I know that might have wanted to be involved in this would have been Jimmy. So that's why the 2-week period was significant, because I got my cell phone, my other phone, the anonymous call phone, the anonymous phone. We referred to them as our other phones, just so that you kind of keep it straight. I got my other phone on May 17th, and I got it right after I spoke to Jimmy. I went and talked to Jimmy in person, and told him that, there was a job, not specifics about who or anything, but made sure that it was something he wanted to get involved in. He was on board. So
Jimmy Rogers is a contract killer?
I don't know that I would call him that, but I know that he's been involved in other deaths. So
You thought he was some kind of tough guy?
Well, I believe that he was somebody that would actually do it. So
Why is the word other significant when referring to the burner phones you were telling us about?
well, I mean, Mark or I, either one, are like into this type of criminal activity. So I've heard lots of terms since this happened. The burner phones and I forget. There's 2 or 3 other terms I've heard used for those kind of phones, but we said other. It was our other phone. I mean, just literally.
Was there any discussion between the two of you about, the two of you ever discuss any codes that you might use to let you know whose phone to call or whose phone to use?
Yes, come up with the plan, and he let me know that since we weren't going to have these phones turned on all the time, that if we needed to talk to each other privately, or anything to do with the crime itself, that we would use the word other in a text between our regular phones. So that was kind of the code to tell us to, turn on the phone and be waiting for a call.
Okay, Curtis Wainwright is testifying there on direct examination. The prosecutor is asking questions. A couple of weeks after the wedding, where Mark Sievers approached him to make this commitment. He decided to do it. He contacted Jimmy Rogers, who's now been convicted in the trial last month, to become involved. And Jimmy, because Jimmy had in the past been involved in criminal activity like this that had led to the death of individuals. They got a burner phone, as we would call it, on May 17th. Jimmy agreed to do the job, and basically they would use these phones and they would text other when they wanted them to get off the private phones, their personal phones, and go on to the burner phones. Katie, very specific information about how this was plotted out and planned. And again, I say, usually witnesses that are lying can't give this kind of specificity.
I agree, and some of the things are weird, specific facts, like this idea of other. Like I wouldn't think to make that up as some false detail to put into something. It rings as true. And also, I don't know if you noticed, the last break, I had actually thought that this testimony was from the first trial. He's that consistent that it's hard to tell the difference between the 2 times that he's given this testimony. I think he's really reliable.
Yeah, and that is a problem in having to bifurcate trials and to try them over again, because even witnesses that are telling the truth, there's now a trial transcript there. How consistent is the story? And if he's doing it just like he did in the first trial, he's going to be subjected to far less cross-examination.
Absolutely. Well, that's opposing counsel's dream, that the witness would get on the stand and testify in some way, shape, or form differently than he did in the prior trial. The other thing I think that's helpful with his testimony is that the prosecutor even said, hey, is he a contract killer? And he said, well, I wouldn't call him that. You know, it's a little troublesome whenever you see witnesses that agree to every last thing the prosecutor throws at them. Oh, that's right, that's right. Is that why I agreed to the plea? You know, but he's being honest. It lends to his credibility.
Yeah, Professor, that's exactly the reason sometimes I would ask a witness a question I knew would go against what I was asking, just to build that credibility. Great point by both of you guys. Take a break. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is more legal news you can use. Today's topic focuses upon the common issue of when your neighbor's trees cause you problems. So what are your rights? By law, you can trim branches or limbs of a neighbor's tree that extends past the property line. But don't go overboard. You can't chop down the tree. Otherwise, you may have to pay for it. Now, if the tree blocks your view, 1, check if there's a local ordinance. 2, maybe you can enter into an agreement with your neighbor regarding the view. Or 3, see whether your neighbor deliberately and maliciously blocked your view, because you then may have a case. A couple more strange things. Your neighbor not only owns the tree, but the fruit on it too. So technically, you're not allowed to pick fruit off of it. Courts, however, are split about fruit that falls onto your property. Although, honestly, why not just go to a supermarket? Are you really that in need of an apple? Also, you may think your neighbor has to clean up all the leaves from the tree that blow into your yard. Well, you'd be wrong. Leaves are not the owner's responsibility, so instead, try building a fence. Now, your neighbor can be held liable by a court if a tree falls and causes damage to your property, but it all depends on how the tree was maintained and inspected. At the end of the day, it's important to know your rights, but always try speaking with your neighbor first to address the problem. Go to lawandcrime.com for more legal news you can use.
A brain aneurysm doesn't care if you're busy. It doesn't care that you have important meetings. It doesn't care that you have to drop your daughter off at ballet and your son off at soccer practice. And if you ignore the warning signs of a brain aneurysm, you'll realize too late that the meeting wasn't that important. No meeting is. That you'll never see another soccer game, and that your daughter won't see you in the audience at the big recital. So if you suddenly experience the worst headache of your life, sharp pain behind your eye, and blurry vision, don't ignore it. Seek immediate emergency care, because your family is counting on you to take care of you. The Lisa Calagrassi Foundation, shedding light on brain aneurysms. Learn more at lisafoundation.org.
As we constantly talk about privacy today, one of the biggest questions is how do you protect a photo or video of yourself from being used online without your permission? Now, I know you kids love face twittering and instabooking, so let's start with the basic idea that you need to be careful where you post pictures and videos. That means understanding a website's terms of service, because you may be granting a site a license to use your image in ways that you weren't aware of. Also, most legitimate sites will lay out their process to remove material, so you'll want to follow those steps first to get something deleted immediately.
But what laws help you to do all this? Here we go, you little legal eagles.
Basic rule: you automatically own the copyright in any photo or video you take. Technically, you can go after someone for copyright infringement if your photos or videos are posted or distributed online without your permission. However, under a complicated law called the DMCA, platforms that allow people to post on their sites, such as YouTube, must be provided notice of the infringement before you can properly sue them. Speaking of lawsuits, you may be able to sue someone under state right of privacy or publicity laws. For example, if without your consent your face or body are being exploited online to sell or promote something, or if there was a photo or video secretly taken of you while you were in private, you may have a very strong case.
Go to lawandcrime.com for more legal news you can use.
Do you know the signs of a brain aneurysm? The worst headache of your life? Pain behind one eye? Dizziness or blurry vision? Don't ignore it. Seek immediate emergency care. The Lisa Calagrassi Foundation. Learn more at lisafoundation.org.